this is going to be very quick, but it's going to be very good. And if you have any questions while we're going through anything on your paper for lessons, so I want you to see this. So down at, let me admit, down at your desk on the paper for lesson, if while I'm speaking, you run into like questions or thoughts or anything, and they don't get answered in the chat, because Helen will be in the chat answering questions. But if they don't get answered, or you just have an aha moment or something you want to say, please put it on your paper for lesson. And I'm going to be going through there and addressing anything that's written down as soon as we get close to finishing. So here's our agenda for today. So once again, on the paper for lesson, please list any questions, concerns, or thoughts. Feel free to write them in the chat. Like I said, I have awesome Helen right next to me. She's helping me out, and she will be monitoring the chat and answering any questions. So we're going to be going through lessons 1 to 14 and talking about scoring today and how they move on to the next phase. And I'm also going to show you how to download the student folder at the very end of the presentation. Okay? All right. So if anyone needs access to lessons 1 to 14, if you want to watch this, you can just watch me do it. But here's lessons 1 to 14 that I'm going to be going over. And then all of these are in the student folder, but today we're also going to be talking about scoring. Okay. All right. So lesson 1 yesterday, we went over this. I also want to make sure, hold on, I have the chat open. Okay, great. Oh, the slide presentation is view only. Oops. Thanks. I'm glad I looked at the chat. Okay. Let me edit that really quick. Change. There we go. Okay, you guys are good. If you just refresh your page, it'll be editing. There we go. All right, so we are on lessons 1 to 14, like I said. I'm going to be reiterating what we went over yesterday with lessons 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to get all the way up to 14, and we are also going to be talking about scoring. Okay, let me exit that. All right. So with lesson 1 yesterday, we talked about paraphrase.com. We talked about the model, where you have to model, and then after the model, you work together as a group, as a class, and then ultimately they do it on their own. So we're going to kind of go back to lesson 1 so you can see the scoring that's going to take place that the students are going to be doing. So up here, there's the learn by watching, the learn by sharing, and the learn by practicing. So in the learn by practicing, that is where they're trying it completely on their own. So these 5 at the end, that is where they're going to be paraphrasing, okay? So down here, you'll notice there's a C. If you remember paraphrase.com, is it correct? Is it in their own words? And does it make sense? So down here, the only thing you're checking in lesson 1 is, did they get the paraphrase for these words correct? So this is just the paraphrasing group. There was another link for the clarifying group. Sorry, Bethany. Okay, so down here, if for begin, they wrote start. You might check your email, Bethany. They sent out 2 separate links. So if they wrote begin and they wrote start, you would go, yeah, that's good. So over here, you would put a check, and you want to get used to checking this column, because this is how you're going to make sure that they get a point. You're going to notice there are points over here. So yes, check, point. Okay. So then over here, you can see assist. So let me show you a student example. If they wrote begin, start, would they get a point? Yes. Okay, what about assist, offer? Then you would say, assist, I offer someone, yeah, check, point. Okay, what about silly, laugh? Yeah, check, point. So you go through this and you add up the points. Now, the threshold for passing this lesson for an individual student is 80%. So they would have to get 4 out of 5 of these correct to say that they've completed this lesson to what we consider the level of mastery. Okay, So right here, they have to get a 4 out of 5. Now, if you are like, oh, I'm never going to remember this, all of this information is in your guidebook with scoring. So if you go to the section with the student scoring at the end of the lesson, it specifically tells you this. Now, for the class to move on, 90% of the participants, which means you have to have almost everybody pass this first lesson. Well, what if they don't? So what happens is you have to give feedback to whatever it is they did. So let's say they took the word assist and they just wrote the word assist again. They didn't even understand the lesson. You have to give them individual feedback that will help them succeed. So let's pretend everybody in the class thought you just copy the words over again. This is where you would give them feedback and say, well, what you did was you copied the word, or you wrote, let's pretend they wrote out the definition. You wrote out the definition, or they wrote like 5 different words. That's great, but that was not the intent of this. If you look at the models from earlier, your goal is to take the words and to write down exactly a synonym for the other word. And you can go back to the cue cards. Your job is to give them feedback from what you see that they might have messed up on, and give them positive feedback. Like, it's good that you got the basis of the word, but ultimately, yes. And all the answer keys are in the book for everybody. It's good that you had that foundation, but ultimately what you need to do is make sure you have the synonyms, because that was the intent of the lesson. So you give them the points, they add up. What do I do with the kids who don't score well? Like, and you said 90%. So those other 2 kids, you just leave them behind, or 4 kids? No, you don't. Ultimately, they need more intensive one-on-one practice with you. So that's a time when you might do like center rotation, let the kids practice on the previous lesson, let them, there's a game that you could play, and it's a game that I play with my students. So the students who need more help, I essentially create a quizzes or a Kahoot, some sort of game, and the game will have a word, and then it'll say pick a synonym. And so ultimately I could say happy, glad, mad, angry, fretful, whatever. So you give them, let them play a synonym game, like with quizzes or Kahoot. And then while the other students are playing that game, you have the ability to go through and to say, hey, you kids with one-on-one here, we're going to practice this. And all of the participants who give us your email, I'm going to email all of you a giant list of Kahoot/quizzes games I've already pre-created that you can use that coincide with this strategy, with the phrases, the words, and everything else. So we'll get to that in a little bit, but that's what I do. Is if I have students who don't, the other kids get practice from the previous lesson. And before I introduce the new lesson, I go through and make sure those other kids have it. And that's why there's learning sheet 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D. Okay. 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. If the kid didn't get it in 1A, you want them to go on to 1B and try it again, where you explain it, you do the watching, you have them do it with you, and then you send them off on their own to practice again. We have to make sure the kids have these basic skill components. Okay, so that's how scoring works. Does anyone have any questions with scoring? So you have to check this. Eventually, you're going to see C, O, and M down here, because you're going to have to check more than just, is it correct? Okay. If you have questions about scoring, just throw it in the chat. But if this makes sense to you and you're like, yeah, I understand how to score that, make sure it's correct, put the points over there, they get 4 out of 5, bam, move on when 90% of the kids move on. Yep, they have to have mastery. Okay, so let's go on to lesson 2, which we covered yesterday, which was phrases. So the scoring for lesson 2, you're going to notice COM are all there. What? We went from C to COM. Okay, so remember, this is correct. Is it in their own words? And does it make sense? So they have to get all 3 boxes to get the points for sheet 2. What does that mean? So let's pretend they wrote regulations, stop. Okay. They didn't change at least 80% of the sentence. The goal is to try to change 60 to 80% of the sentence. So if they only did 1 word, did they put it all in their own words? No, they would not get a box right here. So is it correct? Yes. Does it make sense? Yes, but because they didn't meet all three boxes, they don't get a point. They have to have correct, own words, and make sense. So let me show you a student example. So if I wrote regulations prohibit, statements stop, okay? And then you would say, does that make sense? Do they get a point? Statements stop. Okay, it's in their own words, but it's not correct and it doesn't make sense. So do they get a point over here? No, they don't. They get a 0. Over here, the next one, my greatest desire, my greatest want. Is it correct? Yes. Is it in their own words? No. Does it make sense? Yes. They have to get all three check boxes to get the point. Okay. So you can't say, oh man, that was really good. This is where you're going to look at this before you give them feedback. Because remember, it's 4 out of 5 and say, okay, so this kid did not pass this. So I would meet with Jane one-on-one and I'd say, hey, Jane, you did a great job, but ultimately you're having problems and you're struggling the most with making sure that your statements are correct. So you might go over the sentence frame with her. Make sure you use the sentence frame, Jane. Or is it in your own words? Because, you know, own words make sense. You might briefly go over that, but this shows me down here. This is why there's this scoring guide for the teacher. What is the feedback I need to give Jane to make her successful? That's the whole purpose of this. It's not to make your scoring crazy. It's to provide quick and easy feedback for the student of where they're struggling the most. Okay. So once again, they have to get all three boxes and then they get a point. Their goal is to get 4 out of 5 points in order to have mastery. Does anyone have any questions with lesson 2? Please put it in the chat or say it out loud because I'm going to be going real quick because I want to make sure we get through all of them. All right, I'm going to monitor the chat and I can always go back if someone's typing. Okay, so lesson 3 is where we're moving on to sentences. And I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger because it's kind of hard to see. All right, so lesson 3, here's a student example. And once again, remember, it's correct, own words, make sense. And once they get into sentences, this is where it gets kind of a little bit tricky because remember, proper nouns, this is where we make sure they understand this. Proper nouns can't be changed. I can't change Philip to Robert. That's going to stay the same. So Philip's got to be Philip and Lakeisha's got to be Lakeisha. You can't change those things. So that's going to be reiterated. Now I want you to see a student scoring example. And these are also in your book for you to reference. So you can see, well, I forgot how to score this. It's all in the book for you. So use that book and reference it. And remember, you also have Helen and myself. If you ever have questions, especially like, well, I wasn't sure if this was scored right, you can ask us. You can, like, I'm an email away, so's Helen. So for this one, they wrote, Philip took a hike along the riverbank. And their response was, Philip hiked along the river. Okay, is it correct? Yes. Is it in their own words? No, because they didn't change the majority of the sentence. Remember that key, they got to get 60 to 80%. Most of those river like words, hiked is in there, along's in there. Then they did change the river, but they didn't change enough of the sentence to make it make sense and to make it correct and in their own words. So they have it correct. They have it make sense, but they didn't change their own words to make it theirs. It is not a paraphrase. Then the next one, you'll notice they don't have it correct and it doesn't make sense. So the original sentence was, Lakeisha assisted Tom with his homework. Lakeisha helped assignments. That was a good try. But again, you're going to notice the feedback in these boxes. So if I had to give Jane feedback once again on this, you can see the correct. Is the sentence correct? That's where they're struggling. They're paraphrasing so much that they're missing the true meaning of the original sentence, which shows they're not comprehending it. So you've got to go through and say, what skill is she lacking? Is it the fact that she's not changing the majority of the sentence because she's missing key details? She's missing parts of the synonyms, like she doesn't understand it. This allows you to look at her feedback, to give her feedback to make sure she's successful to get those 4 out of 5 points. Okay, so now you guys kind of have the idea of how scoring works. And up here, they're going to get all the points. This does not count for them. This is just to make sure that they recorded what you did, that down here, they recorded what they did with you. And they can use this while they're doing this part. We want to scaffold for success. That's the whole point of the strategy. All right, now I'm going to be going a little bit faster, but lesson 4. This is where we take from sentences into paragraphs. Like I said, this whole program builds up to where they can get to an entire passage. So they define the topic of a paragraph, define the main idea, define what details are, and identify topic, main idea, and details. Those are 3 separate things, but main idea and topic, kids get it confused all the time. This is going to clarify it for them. The cue cards for this lesson, a paragraph, what is it? It has to be indented at the beginning. So this kind of gives them what a paragraph is. It contains sentences that are related to each other, has a main idea, has some details, has a topic. Now, what is a topic? This is going to let them know, how do I differentiate topic from main idea? So the topic is the thing it's about. And the main idea is something that goes with it that expands on the topic. Kids don't usually get that. And so this lesson, I'm going to tell you from my experience, is where it's going to take them a while to kind of differentiate topic from main idea, because they see it as the same thing at first. So it tells them what a topic is. It gives them the guide in the cue card. And then from there, it gives them an example paragraph that you guys can use to utilize those cue cards to say, all right, what's the topic of this paragraph? What's the main idea? And with the main idea cue card, it also gives them kind of a general idea of what I'm looking for the main idea and how to utilize the topic. So down here, you'll see, to find a main idea, ask, what does this paragraph tell me about the topic? So it's saying you can use the topic to find the main idea. So if you think about like a reading passage, you can use the title of the passage, especially with nonfiction, to start to figure out what's the main idea of these paragraphs. The topic helps you figure out the main ideas, just like the main idea helps you figure out the details. So it literally helps the kids scaffold their way up to figure out, how do all of these things connect? Now, it also goes through, what is a detail? It's a piece of information related to the main idea that builds off of it. And from there, this is when they go into the lesson and they have to say, what is a topic? What's a main idea? And what's a detail? Wait. What happened to correct own words and make sense? The first thing in learning is identifying. We can't have them go through and start paraphrasing. They have to be able to identify these things before they move up a level. So this lesson is very simple. All they have to do is tell me, is this a detail, a topic, or a main idea? And you would think this would be very easy, because all they have to do is write D, T, or M. I told you, topic and main idea, figuring out, is this a topic or is this a main idea? It's really hard for kids. So it gives them up here, when you do your learn by watching, hockey gives me a chance to skate. I love the exercise I get when I play sports. Soccer gives me a chance to run a lot. Sports. You're going to model, okay, so if I was given a paragraph and a title, which one of these would be the title? And you're going to model that by saying, okay, so all of these are about sports. That's the big connection. That's going to be the topic. And then they go through and say, all right, now which one of these are pieces of a main idea? So it's showing the kids kind of backwards design and how a good writer plans out what they're writing. And so they go through, they list their D, T, and M. And then over in the points box down here, it's the same thing without the correct own words and make sense. All you're doing is making sure that they can figure out, is this a topic, a main idea, or a detail? If they get them correct, you give them points over in the points box. So it's the same concept, except they have to start using the words topic, main idea, and details. It starts with identification because we can't have them paraphrase if they can't identify these things. And once again, here's a student example. So you can see them write TTM. They're going to have all of these right because you're going to be modeling with them. And then they have to, once again, get the threshold for mastery to move on. So if they don't reach that 80% mark, they can't move on. They need more foundational skills in topic, main idea, and detail. And your feedback, once again, down here, let's say you see down here that the person struggled with topic, main idea, and detail. Well, it just means maybe that particular section down here was hard for them. You need to have them kind of sit down with you for this lesson to give them feedback and say, why did you list this? I mean, these are wrong. Like, what was your thinking behind it? And then when you hear their thinking, and asking them this is vital for this lesson specifically, you can figure out what are the nuances that they're using in their cognition that are incorrect that I need to fix. Like, I had a kid sit down with me and he's like, oh, well, like sports is kind of like, it's big. So I thought it was the main idea. Because remember, topic and main idea are the one they're going to struggle with the most. The details, I'm going to tell you, they do great with. Oh, okay. So, but sports by itself, that's not really a complete thought. And you'll notice this other sentence builds off of it, which would be more like a main idea. And then he goes, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I was like, why don't you apply that to some of the other ones? Okay. So making sure you give that feedback from this lesson is critical. All right. So let's move on to lesson 5. So they just have been able to identify the topic, main idea, and details. From that, this is when they're going to get this beautiful handout on topic, main idea, and details to paraphrase. You're going to notice it's broken down. It has them put them in separate sections. It has them make sure that they're correct, and it also makes sense. You're going to notice that own words isn't really there yet because our job is to just have them take the sentence out for this and put it in here. So they're not paraphrasing yet. I want to throw that out there. This lesson is just to make sure that they can pull it out of a paragraph now, not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and put it in this diagram. So, and this one's concentrating specifically on identifying details related to a topic and main idea. All right, so in this one, you're going to notice that you're going to be given a topic like books and the main idea, my 3 favorite books. So for this lesson, you want them to be able to say, all right, a detail is something that builds off of it. So this student, okay, their whole goal of this lesson is to put in the details. What? Yeah, they're going to create their own details that go with the topic because creation's the highest level of Bloom. So we're like, let's check and make sure they really understand details. So for what are your 3 favorite books? What if the kid doesn't have 3 favorite books? This is something where you would need to talk to the child to make sure that in the book, like there was one with videos. There was a kid I had who was like, I've only seen 2. And I'm like, what are they? This and this. And then through prodding and talking to them, I was like, okay, so if you've only seen 2 and they're lacking something, like I haven't read 3 books, okay, then you need to make sure that they understand if it's a lack of, I don't know this, that you help them fill in those gaps. So books, my 3 favorite books. So this person wrote Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Prodigal Summer, and Little Women. So the whole problem with that is that Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, it is not a book, it's a movie. So they would not get points for that. All you're doing is making sure they understand how to build the details in with what they're doing. Okay. So details, they get a point for, yes, this is a detail. It would fit into books, my 3 favorite books, or it wouldn't. So it's making sure they know how to create details. And that's, again, how they get points. When you model this, you're going to do one that I believe is with sports. And so when you go up there and you do the one with sports build character, you can say 3 character strengths when you're doing the model. And then they're going to be practicing with you for the next one and filling in 3 different details. And then ultimately, once again, this is the one they're going to do on their own. Okay. And for this one, they just have to list the detail. Now, let's say they write, I like books. That doesn't follow the pattern of topics, my 3 favorite books. It's giving them a very explicit main idea to build off of. And this also can help you figure out if the child's having problems comprehending the main idea, what aspects of main idea are hindering the child. Okay. All right. So moving on with lesson 6. All right, so lesson 6 is where they are given a paragraph now. And they're up here, you're going to see it's on JFK and America's youngest president. So this is where you're going to start teaching them skills like, okay, the topic is typically in the title. So let's read the title. What can we get out of that? And if you watch Helen in the chat, she's giving you the pages in the guidebook that coincide with this, but they're also set up for you specifically for each lesson as you go along. The guidebook is phenomenal and it is very easy to use. So JFK had a full life before he became president. Both of those are completely filled in. The student's job is when they go through and they have to list the details. And you're going to notice down here with the student scoring, the student in this lesson, their main goal is to identify the details in the paragraph. Once again, they're not paraphrasing yet. They can literally just pull out a whole sentence and throw it in there. It's showing them that they can start to figure out where are the details in a sentence. Are they right away? Are they later in the sentence? We're guiding the students once again to identification at a higher level, not just saying this is a detail. They're actually applying it inside an actual paragraph. So for this one, the great one was also the creative one. Creativity and imagination is the topic. Creativity is very important. And then here you're going to see that the student wrote down 3 different details. And one of the details, they wrote, what is true in school will also be true in life. That is not a detail. It's in the paragraph. It's also showing students that every single sentence in a paragraph is not necessarily a supporting detail for the main idea. There are things when we read, like you guys were reading yesterday when we were reading that initial emotional intelligence / memory recall paper, that there are some sentences that are kind of like they go with the paragraph, but they're more like a transition sentence. They're not really a key detail. So it's helping kids disseminate where is important information versus information that is not as important. So obviously this sentence, just because they wrote 3 sentences, it's not going to always give them credit. They have to actually read the paragraph and say, this is important and backs up the main idea I have here. So as long as they write it, well, what if they don't put it in their own words? They don't have to here. They just have to be able to say, this is an important detail that backs up my main idea. And once again, they have to get, for this one, they basically have to get them all right. Why? Because this is a foundational skill. If they write in one of those filler sentences, that's not going to work for them to move on to the next level. So there will be a lot more practice once you hit this, because this is where they're starting to apply what they've learned. What is a topic, main idea, and a detail? Okay, so lesson 7, this is where we begin the TM to D process. So they've had the foundation, they've started to identify those details. Now, find a topic. How do I find a topic? This is going to say, what's the paragraph about? It's going to give them scaffolded steps to go up and to build all the way up to where they need to be for what is the topic, main idea, and detail, and what are ways that I can identify those even easier. Because they've just been able to identify the details in the previous lesson, it's going to go through and give them those questions and answers that they can utilize and go back and forth when they're trying to pick these out. So they'll use the cue card, and this is cue card 12. And in this, you're going to demonstrate how to identify the topic, main idea, and details in a paraphrase using the TM to D process. So topic to main idea to details. And you want to show them this foundational thing because it's going to show them how they can build up. Later, you're going to see that there is a DM to T process because ultimately, sometimes the main idea isn't explicitly stated. We're even going all the way up to inferencing in these lessons. What? Yeah, you'll see it in momentarily. But the TM to D process shows them that ultimately the topic builds into a main idea and into details. And with this lesson, where they're given these paragraphs, the main idea is usually right out front. It's explicitly stated. So it makes it easier at first for them to grasp where are these things typically most of the time. But we are going to provide a lesson, like I said momentarily, where they're going to see it's not all the time. What do we do when it's not all the time? So the TM to D process, utilizing lesson 7. So first thing, they have to identify the topic now, not just the details in the paragraph. They have to say, all right, college, you can do it if you want. And they get this and they sit and they say, all right, so I'm going to say this is about preparing for college. Is that about preparing for college? Yes. Okay. And you're going to notice that in the main idea, the students, they wrote goals should be explained for teachers and parents. Now, this is where you start to explain the thinking of how to build into the main idea. So when you do your model and everything else, you're going to show them, how can I use the topic to help me find the main idea? So if I said goals should be explained to teachers and parents, if I was meeting with the student for feedback after their scoring, I would say, does that deal with college success and preparing for college? And then they would go, huh, well, I guess it doesn't really have the key word. And you need to help them figure out what reasoning is causing them problems once again. So in this one, they're missing the main idea and they're missing one of the details. The kid would have to go back through and get those foundational components correct to move on. There is a level of mastery. This is where this whole section in the middle is where they're going to need a lot of practice. The beginning will fly through for the first 3 lessons, but once they get past lesson 3, this is where you're going to start to figure out what errors in thinking they have and to correct them. And they'll need practice because they've had their mind set on one way for a long time. So it might take up to learning sheet C, but typically when you do the learn, you model to them, you model what thinking that they've had incorrect, and you model how to fix it and have them utilize those cue cards. You're going to see success, but it will take more than one time. And that's why I said you can't plan on getting done this entire strategy in 14 days. It's 14 lessons in 14 days. No, it usually takes me with my 8th grade students about 2 months to get through the whole strategy. And so you have to plan on like almost like a week of practice. And a week of practice is really good for them to make sure they understand the process. Yeah, 2 months. That was me, 2 months. So once they've moved through 7, where they have the DM to T, the TM to D process, and they understand how to pick these out, we're going to move on to lesson 8. And this is where they're going to be identifying the details of a paragraph and state the details of a paragraph in their own words. So this is where they have to use all of paraphrasing. We're throwing it all together to get those details. So lesson 8, basically you're going to conduct the learn by watching activity by doing the TM to D process, and you're going to show them how to paraphrase the main idea and details. Before, they just had to pick them out. They were just picking them out, doing it completely on their own. They have to be able to put it in their own words. They have to do the .com now. They have to. So you're going to see this learning sheet looks a little different. We want to guide the students for success. So they were using this to pull out the information, put it in its right spots. Like this sentence is the topic. This is the main idea. This is the detail, detail, detail. Then they can use this graphic organizer to build, now that they've identified, this is the main idea, this is the topic, this is the detail, this is the detail. They're going to use that to scaffold themselves to success because we've identified a single sentence just like they did previously. Remember that? And so now that they've pulled out that single sentence, all they have to do is paraphrase.com. Is it correct? Is it in their own words? Does it make sense? So this helps them scaffold their way up to paraphrasing paragraphs. And so they have the access to the learning sheet. So you're going to notice up here, what's the topic? Jackie Robinson. Okay, so the topic helps me find the main idea. So the main idea of this, Jackie Robinson suffered a lot of abuse. And you're going to notice that down here, the student took this sentence and wrote, people were really mean to Jackie Robinson. That's not the same thing. And so this is where you're going to see, can they pick it out? Can they take it and paraphrase it and put it in their own words and make it correct and make sense? So this is where we're putting everything together for them. They have the support of being able to pick out the different components, and then they have to paraphrase it. So here is the awesome thing with lesson 8. This is going to make sure that they have all of their ability to pull stuff out, still working, still good. And can I take that information and use paraphrasing for it? And once again, because they haven't had to do this, this lesson is going to take a little bit of practice. This is one where they do put in, I would say, a few learning sheets to get to the next lesson. But I'm going to tell you, after lesson 8, that's when you're going to start to see that success pulling in. This is the lesson where they start to figure out, how do I do this? How do I use this tool to access the content? Then after they've reached mastery for this lesson, they're going to move on to lesson 9. So lesson 9 is to identify and paraphrase the topic, main idea, and details in a series of paragraphs using TM to D. If they just did it previously and you taught lesson 8 well, this is what, once again, where I told you, where you start to see success. This lesson, lesson 9, because I make sure lesson 8 is so foundational, they start to be able to paraphrase entire passages because lesson 9 is where they're putting it all together. And it's amazing to see kids go, oh my gosh, if I can do that, I can do this. And then I can do a whole thing. And you're going to see that success. So lesson 9, they're given a passage and it's short. It's 3 paragraphs. This paraphrase sheet, you're going to be like, this looks familiar. That was the pre-test sheet. Yes, that we used. So this sheet is going to be the one you're going to be using over and over again. And ultimately, for this sheet, you're going to see COENG. This is for you. We are getting rid of that scaffolded support of the box. We're getting rid of all that. We're going to say, all right, now it's your time to do this. If you taught lesson 8 well, we take away that support because it's their time to scaffold themselves. If they did well in lesson 8, then they will be successful in lesson 9 and onward. Lesson 8 is critical once again. So as you read their paraphrase from the lesson, you have to make sure you have to have 3 checks in this box. Is what they wrote correct in their own words? And does it make sense? You have 3 checks. Oh yeah, that's what we did in lesson 3. Yes, 3 checks to get the point. Once again, they have to have those 3 checks. And I like to separate the boxes because ultimately, remember, you're going to be giving feedback to the student. You need to see what areas they start to struggle with. And you're going to see for every step ahead, they move a little bit back. And sometimes they forget key components that they struggled with earlier. And so this is where you're going to start reminding them, hey, remember when with making sure that it's correct, you have to make sure that what you're writing could fit in this whole paragraph. It has to be correct in your own words and make sense. So this is kind of what the scoring looks like. You have the 3 checks. And like I said, I like to separate them into boxes. If it's correct, they get a check. Own words, check. Make sense, check. and then they'll get 0 points if they're missing any of those. The reason this is a good thing too is it shows the kid they are not a failure, because sometimes kids are like, oh my gosh, I failed this. No, you are not a failure. This is where they're going to be charting their progress using the progress chart so they can see that they have success. These checks show them, and you can be like, man, you were really good at putting it in your own words. You did phenomenal. Great job on synonyms. Start with the positive feedback, then give them the corrective feedback. This provides you with that strength-based, to use their strengths to explain stuff to them. So you can say, hey, your strength is this, you're doing this awesome, but the thing you need to make sure you're doing okay on is it correct? So you're paraphrasing all the words, you're using that thesaurus, but is it correct? And does it make sense? Those two things are kind of hand in hand. You've got to make sure. So once again, it provides great feedback. You have to make sure that they get the score for mastery. Once again, is back to 80%. They've got to get that in order to move on to the next lesson. And here's the cool thing. Once they start to get this, you're going to notice that they're like, reading stuff isn't so hard anymore because I know where to look for what I need. Just like that strategy you guys used yesterday for that hard passage. You're like, oh yeah, well, I know I usually look at the conclusion, main idea, details. They're learning that. Okay, so after lesson 9, where they've started to implement all of this information, where they're using multiple paragraphs, and they've done the scoring, or you've done the scoring, you've given them the feedback, you've pulled kids in who've needed it. Remember, 90%, when 90% of your class has this, you move on to the next lesson. You don't leave those kids behind. They still got to practice the previous lesson. But you give them a few days. Like, you don't have to move on with the new lesson right away for your other students. You can let them practice the current lesson, give feedback to that individual student or students, make sure they have it by moving on to 1B. Once they have it, go with your whole class. I like to do the games for a couple of days to make sure I got all my kids together so I can move on. I like to get to that 100% threshold. And I'm going to tell you, as a teacher, that's probably what you should aim for success. And I know it says 90, but I don't like leaving any kids behind. So giving the other kids extra practice with the lesson they're currently on, with the games that I'm going to send you, is a great thing while you get those other kids caught up. Okay, so after 9, lesson 10, this is where they're going to be creating the topic and main idea. Because remember Bloom's taxonomy, highest level, creation. Can they create a topic and main idea when given details of a paragraph? So we're making sure not only can they just identify, pick it out, paraphrase it, can they do creation? Can they figure out how these things are related? This is the highest level of Bloom's. This is making sure they really understand topic and main idea. So in this activity, they're given details: making a new friend, winning a big game, getting a high grade. From there, you're going to say, all right, what do all these things have in common? And your model that you're going to be doing is going to be working backwards. So ultimately, you're going to say, okay, so what do these things have? Or in this case, Kansas Jayhawks, Kentucky Wildcats, Duke Blue Devils. What are all those things? Well, okay, all of those are colleges, but they're ultimately sports teams as the topic. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, what if my student has no, like, I didn't know who the Kansas Jayhawks were, or the Kentucky Wildcats, or the Duke Blue Devils? This is where you can allow those kids time to look up the details. So for example, I had students, like for this learning sheet, they were like, I have no idea what these are. I had a girl, she didn't watch any sports teams, she didn't have any idea. So she looked them up and she's like, all of these are like college teams. And I'm like, ooh, okay. So if they're lacking foundational background knowledge, let them use a computer to look them up for the lessons. It will not detract from this because they get to pick those up and figure it out together. Okay, so that's for lesson 10. And once again, they have to get the topic and main idea right in order to get the entire thing correct to move on. Because this is not 80%, because there's only 2 things we're checking. They have to get both of them right. So if they don't know the details, let them look them up. Now, this is where we begin inferencing. What inferencing. Well, I didn't know that was part of paraphrasing. Yes, it is. So instead of the TM to D process, we just had them use details to figure out the main idea and topic. The reason why behind this is that if they can look at the details and figure out the main idea and topic, they can use the details for inferencing. If the main idea isn't clearly stated, what do? It helps them inference for the strategy. So in lesson 11, they are introduced to this process. So the DM to T process is they have to find the details. And after they find the details, they have to think of what the main idea is. And then from finding the main idea, they have to think of the topic. Okay. So lesson 11 has you doing this. You're going to do the learn by watching, learn by sharing, learn by practicing. They're given the learning sheet. And in this learning sheet, their job is not to go straight through and be like topic, main idea, and details. We want them to find the details first, because in this passage, the main idea is not right out front. It's not. This is where they have to start to infer. And so they have to find the details first, because the details are going to be stated right away. The main idea of the passage is you can get it through finding the details. So you'll say, all right, this one, do you guys see the main idea right away? No, we don't. There's a whole bunch of details up front. This is where you're going to say, all right, this is where we're going to start using the DM to T process. If you're missing that main idea, let's discover it by finding the details first and figuring out what they have in common, just like the previous lesson. Okay. So then from that, when they use this process, when they use DM to T, they have to get, once again, for the student scoring example, they have to get 80% right. But you can use the boxes, to figure out what are they messing up on. Is it they're not using the DM to T process and they're just trying to do topic, main idea, and details? Because you're going to see kids, they're going to be like, main idea is in the first sentence. This is where you're going to get those kids who believe main idea is always in the first sentence, and they're just going to list it. And that's going to be their struggle, is because they think they can only do the main idea only gets done one way. And that's not the case. It can be inferred sometimes, especially with higher level passages. So DM to T is critical for that. And you have to make sure that they meet mastery in the DM to T process. This helps them infer. So the model for this would look like you read the paragraph and you say, okay, so it's stating key details right away. Let's list out those key details. You list out the details. Then you say, all right, guys, let's be a detective. How does this detail and this detail and this detail about Rosa Parks come together? What sentence do you feel like really pulls them all together? Then they go, oh, it's this sentence that's 4 sentences down. Yes, so that's our main idea. And then from the main idea, we can make sure that the topic coincides with it. And the topic, once again, you can also have them look at the actual title to find the topic, but the main idea is not explicitly stated. And that's the purpose of the DM to T process. It helps them figure out where that main idea sentence is if it's not in the beginning. All right, then lesson 12. This is where we have them identify and paraphrase the topic, main idea, and details in a series of paragraphs using DT to MT process. So they just did it for one paragraph where the main idea was hidden. What if we had a whole bunch of paragraphs where the main idea was hidden? That's the purpose of this lesson. So this is hard. And I'm going to tell you, lesson 12, it's going to be another struggle, but not as long. Once they start figuring out, when they find the details first, they can piece together the main idea. This is going to be one that takes a few days for your students. So they're given a passage. They're given the big paraphrasing sheet that we saw earlier that you use for your pretest. That's where you use it over and over again. And they have to use the DM to T process to figure out, where is that little main idea sucker? And sometimes it's even in the last sentence of the paragraph. And so once again, this helps the student infer using the details to figure out the main idea. And once again, mastery is 80%. So lesson 13, this is when they're putting everything together, ladies and gentlemen. They have to use TM to D and D to MT flexibly for a real passage. Because let's be honest, real passages that we read, sometimes the main idea is right up front in certain paragraphs. Sometimes it's not. That's real life reading. At this point, we have given them all the skills to be successful, but they have to be able to use it flexibly, because they're going to ask you, okay, do I TM to D or do I DT to MT? You have to decide that when you start to read the paragraph. Do you see the details up front? Do you see the main idea right away? This is where they have to start using the whole process together. So they're given learning sheets, and from that, they're given the paraphrasing sheet that they used previously. Their job, once again, is to reach 80%. This is going to tell you, do they have problems with inferring, or do they have problems when the main idea is explicitly stated in finding details? Those are going to be the two big things that you're going to give feedback on. When you give that feedback, you're going to know, is inferencing the big problem that they're having and finding the main idea, or is it when they're doing this, they just can't find the details? Those will be the two big pieces of feedback you give. And this is going to be another lesson where it's going to take them a while. And this usually takes me about a week and a half with my students. So once they get past this and they've figured out TM to D, DM to T, I got all the things, we're going to have them use it with an actual passage with questions. Why? Because that's the whole purpose of this, ladies and gentlemen. We want them to be able to use this for real life passages, for science, math, social studies, whatever class they're in. We've given them all the tools. Now it's time for them to start to realize they're their tools and they need to start using them. So lesson 14 gives them a standardized reading comprehension test, like your SOL type situation. But it's to show them they can use this on anything. You also, one of the things that I do is have them bring in some reading passages that they have for homework or other classes, world geography. And I said, hey, why don't you use paraphrasing for this to get through it and answer the questions? And they're like, I can do that. And you can bring that in during this lesson to show them this is a transferable skill. That's the whole purpose of lesson 14, is to show them they can use this on things like tests for the SAT, the ACT, for their driving test, that they're, well, the written portion of the driving test. So if they have longer paragraphs or even sentences, they have to figure out those main idea. The main idea is critical all the time, and we know that. And they're going to be using the DM to T process and the TM to D process on this passage. Their job is, when they do this, they're going to go through this passage and they're going to look at the questions and say, does this question ask me about a detail, a main idea, or a topic? Why would that be important? Because it guides the student on what to look for. So now they're not just analyzing this, they're analyzing the questions. Is this a detailed question? Are they asking me a main idea question? Are they asking me a topic question? It's going to help the student say, oh, questions ask me for certain components. This is the component I need to look for. And that's what you're going to be modeling in this lesson. This is where you've taken all of it and you say, all right, when you're given questions for anything, is this a detailed question, a main idea question, or a topic question? They use paraphrasing for this. Okay, they use it and then they answer the questions. So here's a student example. This is a main idea question, detail, main idea. Here are the answers that I chose. You're scoring two things. You're scoring them labeling the questions, and you're scoring, did they get the question right? Mastery, once again, is 80%. They have to reach 80%. And this is critical because it's having them analyze questions for what are they asking for. So we're taking this all the way up to the highest level. And then after they reach 80%, they do their post test. What's their post test? It could be the passage from the manual, or it could be another passage that you have from their science class. You could get some materials from their history class. Pull those in, you cut it off at 400 words and have them paraphrase. Once they have reached mastery on the post test, they're done. They're done. They can move on to the paraphrasing strategy. You can have them go straight into that because remember, this is fundamentals. Or I've seen a student be so successful with fundamentals that they tested out of the paraphrasing strategy. When I said, hey, let's move on to this, they tested out and they did amazing. So ultimately, this is the thing. The student who I helped, I'm going to tell you, this kid, I had him this year. He had never passed a reading SOL ever. And the goal wasn't to pass the reading SOL. He was like, when I go to high school and I have to start passing these tests, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm like, I'm going to teach you this strategy. We went through it digitally / virtual / online in real person. And at the end of the year, the kid had to take the SOL even during a pandemic year. This was his first year passing his reading SOL. First year ever. I'm going to tell you, the dude cried. He cried because he never thought he would have the ability to do it. A lot of our kids are beaten down, and this makes them successful because it makes sure that they have the strongest foundation so they can use it to succeed. So I want you to know this strategy does more than just help kids. It gives them the tools that they've been lacking for success. So you've seen the entire strategy, ladies and gentlemen. And with the entire strategy that you've had, there is a Google form for follow-up. If you would like follow-up from Helen, if you would like to see models of me in my classroom, if you would like to be given extra materials, because I've got so many for this, it's ridiculous. All I need you to do is go into the chat. Helen put up a Google form for follow-up, fill it out, and we will be in contact with you. There's one last thing I want to do with my last 4 minutes. I want to make sure you guys have that student folder. So if you guys, I'm going to share, there's a link right here. And I'm going to reshare the classroom because I'm going to show you how to download this folder onto your computer. So if you're not a Google school, you can have it. If you are a Google school, you can upload it. Oh, I just sent it straight. Send it to everyone. Here's the classroom. I need you to watch me so you can have this folder because this is going to be your first big cool thing that you get for free that you can use. So what you're going to do is you're going to open the folder up. When you've opened the folder up, okay, actually I'll send you the link to this because that's what I should have done first. I'm going to send it in the chat. When you open the folder up, this is what you need to do. Everybody, whether you're on a Chromebook or wherever, because I want you to have this because this has everything you need all set up. And then you would make copies of it for each one of your students. Because you're outside of my organization, those of you who are inside like Selena, you may be able to just download it. But ultimately, go down here, you'll see a button, pull this drop down that says download. Click that. It's going to zip this whole file up and then you upload it to wherever you are in your organization and you have it. You can have it. If you don't use Google, you can use it with PowerSchool or Canvas or whatever you do. It's set up for you. It has the links in there. You'll have your own copy with all your own stuff in it. Download this folder and you've got everything set up for you. Okay? And if you have any other questions, concerns, or thoughts, I'm going to go back in the classroom and look at your desk, but make sure you go to this drop down, click download, and it'll download on your computer right now. And you have everything to do this set up and ready to go. And once again, if you fill out that Google form for follow-up, I will send you the games that I use with the students when we're waiting to move on to the next thing. And usually the games last a couple of days, so I have plenty of time to do follow-up with my students, and then we move on to the next one. That's why it takes about, like I said, 2 months to get through the whole strategy. The first few lessons, they fly through them. And then when we start getting into using the skill, they get bogged down for a little bit. But once they do, you'll have students like mine, like the one I just told you about. He cried because he can do it now. He has the skills that he's been lacking. And we've analyzed them and pulled them out. And he's had so much feedback that now I know he can go to high school and be successful. So if you guys have any last minute questions, thoughts, or anything else, we have about a minute left. Once again, make sure you download this folder so you have the whole thing set up. And I'm going to tell you, they need to do the progress chart. This is an amazing progress chart. It'll make the kid feel good. They can fill out for each one of their lessons. I just want to show you this real quick if anybody doesn't have any thoughts. Okay. So on the progress chart, they go in here and it takes a couple seconds to load. They fill in their scores that they get. And you're going to notice over here is going to be a graph. It graphs their scores as they move through the whole strategy. So they can feel like that they're super successful. And it'll take a few seconds to update and to load because I have, see, look at that. And it graphs it. So they're also learning to keep track of their progress and set goals. Okay. All right. Well, you guys have been an amazing group. It is 9:30 and some people are going to start coming back now. I cannot thank you enough for your time and for helping students, because I did a lot of talking today. It wasn't as interactive, but I needed to make sure you had the components. Helen and I are here to support you. If you fill out that Google form, we are here for you as you try to implement this and with any roadblocks you come on along the way. And I can't thank you enough for your time, how awesome you guys did. And I'm just so excited that more students will have more tools to be successful because of you guys. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to chime in, say anything, because you guys have a couple of minutes.
Kathleen, I just want to say thank you so much. This is Kim, for a great presentation. And at the end of today, we'll talk a little bit more about that opportunity that Kathleen and Helen were sharing about moving on with or getting some extra support in the routine or strategy from SIM. So we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Kristen, to upload it to your Google Drive, let me just show you this really quick. Once you've downloaded it, all you need to do is go into your Google Drive. You'll click New File Upload. Okay, Kristen? So once you've downloaded it, you click File Upload, you find that file that you downloaded, and then it's in your Google Drive.